Shana Tova. Good Yontif. Last spring, on one of our visits to Tucson with extended family, we hit the outside basketball courts as we usually do. So it was my husband, Damien, our two teenage sons, Eli and Ben, my brother and sister-in-law, Aubrey and Laura, and our 9-year-old nephew, Colin. And when we arrived on the court, a little girl and her grandfather were already shooting a ball around. So we asked if they wanted to play a little 4v4 together, and Laura cheered us on from the sidelines, and soon it was on. The girl had a perfect granny shot, and her grandfather knew how to get her the ball. They were amazing. And that was great because Eli and I were on their team, and we won. And they were too polite to gloat, but Eli and I were not. So after a few hoots and hollers, we started to walk off the court. And just then, as the grandfather's foot hit the grass beyond the court, he crumbled. And at first it seemed that maybe he tripped or maybe he fainted, but soon it was clear that he was in distress. And he was struggling to breathe, so Aubrey immediately began CPR as we got a 911 operator on the phone, and she encouraged Aubrey. The key was to keep his heart pumping until an ambulance could arrive. And the hospital was so close, we could actually see its light from the courts. So Aubrey knelt over this grandfather, heel of one hand on his heart and then the other hand on top of that, and continued the quick compressions, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 30, 4 cycles per minute. And Aubrey was literally keeping this man alive. But all of us there on the court, we had a role to play. Aubrey keeping the oxygen circulating in the body of this man as best he could, and Damien supporting Aubrey, counting off 1, 2, 3, 4 to keep Aubrey on pace. And Laura and I going to a park bench with the granddaughter to call her grandmother, and Eli and Ben distracting Colin. And after minutes, the ambulance arrived. So our kids went home with Aubrey and Damien while Laura and I walked that little girl to the hospital and stayed long enough not only for her grandmother to greet her there, but for the ER doc to come out and let us know that her grandfather was sitting up, ready to see her. Now, I share this story because it so viscerally captures what for many of us, this last year has felt like. A year where our adrenaline and anxiety had been on overdrive. It has been on overdrive, and we feel pummeled on our daily heart attack. We feel it in our bodies. So many people and places and causes we care about under siege. It hurts. We wake up in the morning worrying about so many issues. Right now, our homeland under siege. As we wake up, we worry. Is it too polarizing to talk about what I think is at stake in this coming election? Are our children safe? Are they healthy? Are they physically healthy? What about emotionally? And how many we think about when we're worried not only at home, but as we turn to what's happening internationally in the Middle East, in Ukraine and Sudan, and especially in Israel. How many have died? How many enemies must we confront, and from how many directions? Are we, the Jewish people, going to be able to emerge in this new year unified when international and domestic issues threaten to tear us apart? We need CPR. We need CPR because as haggard as we are, we have more work to do in this coming year. And to do that, we need each other. There were 5 generations of us on the basketball court that night, helping the grandfather in distress, from a boomer to Gen Alpha. And since that time, I've reflected so often on this situation, how it could have happened differently. What if we hadn't worked together? And I know that working across generations, well, it's not easy. We've noticed this not only in our Jewish community, but in America at large. And right now, there are 7 living generations, from the greatest generation to Gen Alpha, who are kids aged 11, to those who are yet to be born through the year 2029. And different experiences have shaped each generation. They've shaped us fundamentally differently. The greatest generation, well, they tend to focus on the collective over the individual. They depended on neighbors to help each other through the Great Depression and wartime. And they, that greatest generation, are responsible for building this magnificent temple. And next, the silent generation, the youngest of whom lived through the Great Depression, and the oldest shaped the civil rights movement. They're called the silent generation, sandwiched between the greatest generation and the noisy boomers, who came of age during the 1960s and 70s and are often associated with the civil rights movement and second wave feminism and counterculture. And there's Gen X, who, unlike their parents, by and large, don't define themselves through protests. They grew up in the unabashed materialism of the 80s. I say they, but I'm talking about myself. And we also grew up in the shadow of the AIDS and crack epidemics. Next are the millennials, digital natives who had been the most optimistic generation until the Great Recession hit in 2008, when many had to move back in with parents. You see how they felt about that. Or some of them didn't even leave home in the first place. Yet those challenges had taught them to prioritize their mental health with self-care and support. And then there's Gen Z, who strive for highly collaborative environments, seeking relevance and authenticity, especially when tackling big issues like climate change and LGBTQ+ rights and racial equality, yet still tend toward individualism. And most spend over 8 hours a day on screens. Recognize them? And finally, we have Gen Alpha, born from 2013 forward, and some sociologists have nicknamed them the polars, not because of these polars, or because they are fans of my favorite polar, but because of these polars, polarization. In fact, 2 global issues, climate change and intense political polarization, are expected to have intense effect on this generation. They are supposed to affect their worldview of these Gen Alphas as they grow older. And how polarized is America right now? I think you know. 70% of Americans polled say our nation has become so polarized that we can no longer solve the major issues facing our country. Maybe we can lose this slide. The matriarchs make us feel a little better. And 83% are concerned about political violence, and they should be. Just weeks ago, we saw our second attempt to assassinate former President Donald Trump, which resulted in the death of an innocent civilian, Corey Comparatore. And violence against politicians and public servants has become pervasive in recent years, with assaults and shootings and assassination attempts against congresspeople on both sides of the aisle. And a Supreme Court justice was also someone who was victimized. All these, combined with the January 6th storming of the Capitol means that violence is not just directed against politicians and public servants, but against democracy itself. 71% of Americans surveyed by CBS News believe American democracy is now threatened. Democracy is under attack, and it needs CPR. And Edwin, if you're listening, I'd love to lose this slide. Okay, well, it's fair because our young people have only known a world in which every day they see people tearing down the fabric that unites us as Americans. First sigh of relief. The other one was when we actually were finally able to put the ark all the way down. So I'll just say what you know, that we have seen the ways in which, unfortunately, we not only disagree with each other, but we denigrate and demonize each other. Sometimes we dehumanize each other. And in this divisive world, how do we build a center that can hold differences with integrity, where we don't have to compromise our principles or ethical imperatives, but instead can act on them? Imperatives like welcoming the stranger and loving your neighbor and pikuach nefesh, saving a life. Yuval Levin from the American Enterprise Institute reminds us, we are not supposed to think alike. We are supposed to act together. We're not supposed to think alike. We're supposed to act together. On the basketball court, one man survived because a group of people found ways to work together. And the next generation is counting on us to find ways to work together to save the democracy that we all treasure, but yet sometimes take for granted. And too often we place responsibility for its preservation on politicians rather than considering how our everyday actions can bolster or weaken our democracy. And democracy is not just about how politicians work together out there, but how we, all of us, treat each other here, in our synagogues and schools, in our neighborhoods and workplaces. Just a handful of years after the Civil War, Walt Whitman wrote Democratic Vistas, a political analysis of the state of the Union then. After he witnessed the fragility of our republic, he challenged his readers not to depend merely on politicians to save democracy, but to depend on each other. And I invite us to imagine him addressing us now when he asks, "Did you, O friend, suppose democracy was only for elections, for politics, for a party name? I say democracy is only of use in manners and in the highest forms of interaction between people." Manners and the highest forms of interaction between people. That was his recommendation then. To do that today, I suggest that we resuscitate our democracy and the principles upon which it stands right here, where it all starts, with we, the people. And this year, when we have been afraid, feeling both under attack and ignored, well, we, the people, have behaved badly. I know I'm not alone, but I have behaved badly. I have not only lived this myself, but you, members of the congregation, have come to me with painful stories about cutting off friends and shouting down neighbors and hanging up on our children. And all understandable in the stress, anxiety, and real fear in this year, but still all damaging to the health and survival of our democracy. So I'm asking us, each one of us, to be the ones to perform CPR with the highest forms of interaction between people. staying curious, getting present and patient, and relating to others with respect. It's not so easy to stay curious in our world with our defenses high, but you have to know that it's hardly unique to today to be this hard for us as Jews. We have 2 millennia of Jewish texts testifying to equally challenging times, starting with Moses, who implemented systems of justice which became the foundations upon which American democracy were built. Moses wrestled with the responsibility of adjudicating difficult cases among people, and he begged God, give me a clear-cut Torah. Give me an easy response. Just tell me what to do. And God countered, stay curious. When a civil case comes to you, you must find 49 reasons to rule in favor of acquitting and 49 reasons to rule in favor of convicting. And then only after you've gone through this rigorous process, God tells Moses, of finding 49 ways to see the issue thoroughly through one framework, and then 49 ways to see it exactly from its opposite, only then can you decide. Now, can you imagine having to come up with 49 ways to see things from an opposing perspective? To do that requires presence and a whole lot of patience, a special kind of patience, because patience can be burdensome. And in this way, I would say it has an element of respect, because the Hebrew root of the word for respect, kavod, means heavy. It's heavy to take someone else's point of view into account. Life feels easier when we talk only with like-minded people. But this world, it's heavy, especially because we take seriously the Jewish teaching that every person is, in fact, made in the image of God. And that means that we must take them and their opinions into account, and we do have to treat them with a modicum of respect, whether we think they deserve it or not. Democracy depends on human decency, the highest interaction between people. CPR, curiosity, patience, respect. Now, the politician Edwin Rosh tested this approach. Outside a Trump rally with a lot of counter-protesters in LA, he pitched an empathy tent. He invited 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats into the tent and split them into 6 pairs. And he facilitated conversations between them where they listened carefully, and then they had to state their own understanding of the other person's perspective. And Rosh recalls, on the other side of the street, rally-goers and protesters were screaming at each other, and the police had to come in to keep them apart. But in the tent, of those 6 pairs, 5 of them ended up giving each other hugs. And it might seem easier to do this when you don't have any skin in the game, when you can be impartial like Rosh, but how many times are we impartial about something? What about when we have something on the line? When the person who disagrees with you vehemently is actually disagreeing about something that you care so deeply about. Our tradition teaches us that even then, actually especially then, we are commanded to engage, as long as it's safe. And one of Temple Shulam's own, Eli Buxbaum, well, certainly he had skin in the game when he attended a pro-Palestinian rally in November carrying this sign. Let's have a civil conversation. Each conversation he started in the same way, with a question. He was genuinely curious. What brought you here? And many of them wanted to be part of something larger than themselves. And Eli could respect that because he too is part of something that is bigger than himself. He's part of the Jewish people. And he explained why he's a Zionist. And even there, thoughtful conversations ensued about what it means to feel like you have a place in the world and a people, and what safety really means, physically and emotionally. And they talked about where parallels and analogies to other contexts of identity struggles break down when applied to the Middle East. And of course, every conversation did not feel good. And at the end of the day, those conversations didn't change anything materially, or did they? Eli said that he has never felt as human as he felt that day. He showed up with all his humanity, and because he was curious, present, and patient, and treated people, all the people he met that day, with respect, well, everyone showed up like that for him too. They saw each other's humanity. And that might not seem so significant, but Eli doesn't take intentional conversations lightly, and neither should we. Talking about important issues is one of the most cherished Jewish values. And for Eli, every conversation is a collaboration. It helps to thicken the fabric of what binds us as a society, creating more faith in one another, so that we can act on our imperatives to welcome the stranger and love our neighbors, and to do the work of pikuach nefesh, saving lives. We're not supposed to think alike, but we are commanded to act together with manners, with the highest forms of interaction between people. Well, we have work to do. So get out the vote, yes, and free and fair elections without intimidation, yes. By the way, just as the get out the vote, you know the early voting started today. Okay. And of course, respect election results and build the daily practice of democracy that creates citizens worthy of one of the greatest societal experiments of all time. We have the responsibility to do this, bestowed upon us by our tradition and by the greatest generation who built this great space to house 7 generations, a true community of shalom, who know how to take action together. In this new year, are you willing to try your hand at performing CPR in a conversation with someone you don't agree with? Maybe that'll actually happen on the way to Tashlich today. Could you try with curiosity, presence, and patience and respect? Are you ready to start to learn how to build and repair our democracy by participating in our intergenerational storytelling night on our lives with politics? And Allison Siegel, I just want to say I'm very looking forward to hearing your stories. And David Inlander, the people who I can make contact with, I feel like I should shout them out right now. Later, anybody who I didn't make eye contact with and I didn't mention, you can give me the stink eye later. But remember, CPR. I make mistakes too, lots of them. Maybe you'll join our workshop on how not to ruin Thanksgiving, or talking with people you love but don't like so much after this election. And maybe you'll join us to listen to our distinguished speaker this year, Robert Putnam, as he addresses From Bowling Alone to Bonding Together, Strengthening Community in the Face of Polarization. So I'll close with this. In this morning's Torah reading, we saw Judaism's greatest patriarch, Abraham, nearly sacrificing his son, Isaac. And if it were not for the angels, we would not be here to listen to this story. But the angel of God was sent to remind Abraham of his responsibility to save Isaac. When the angel called out, "Abraham, Abraham," Abraham responded, "Hineni, here I am," ready to act, ready to learn, ready to serve. Abraham heeded the angel's warning and promised and saved his son. And we here in the United States had another Abraham in this nation's history who reminded us of the importance to heed the call of angels to heal a nation. And this next generation is depending on us. And so is mine, and so is yours. All is never lost. We're in this together. So let's hear the call of the better angels of our nature, and let us too respond, Hineni. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will, and may it be ours. Amen.
Amen.
Shana Tova.